Okay, greetings everyone. Thanks for joining us for the virtual seminar series. I know there's some more people that might try to sneak in or make the teleconference coming in a little bit here. This is our virtual seminar series, the last one of the spring 2015 session, and we're happy to have Evan Koepke in for us today. Evan works with Team Rubicon, and I'm going to go ahead and read his bio briefly just to kind of give you a quick introduction of him and some of the work that he's done with Team Rubicon. Evan is the Operations Planning Associate for Team Rubicon, and it's a veterans-based disaster relief organization. Originally from the world of wilderness search and rescue, he has been involved in volunteer leadership, emergency management, and wilderness rescue for 8 years now. He's native to Virginia, earning a degree in urban and environmental planning from the University of Virginia, and sneaking emergency management studies in and listening to dispatch from class. Evan spent time at Homeland Security Institute as an intern and the Red Cross. He's also a former chairman of the Blue Ridge Mountain Rescue Group and the Appalachian Search and Rescue Conference, and has interned at both the Homeland Security Institute and Red Cross, as I mentioned. Today, Evan enjoys the perpetual summer of Los Angeles, lucky him, as we sit in this misty, foggy weather here, orchestrating emergency planning, doctrine development, and mission planning for disaster relief at home and abroad. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Evan. He'll have the floor and for about the next 50 minutes, and if anyone else has questions, think of them. You can jot them in the chat room, or you can ask them at the end. All right, here you go, Evan.
Brilliant. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to get the opportunity to talk to you today. The purpose of this talk today is really to introduce all of you to a modified perspective of what volunteers and veterans have to give to the emergency management and disaster relief field. There is a long-standing tradition of volunteers being clumped together as a relatively unreliable and variable quality resource. The developments of the modern age are changing that perspective and also providing new opportunities for public-private cooperation. Hopefully by the end of this you'll be able to see why this is coming to be and how big of an asset both volunteers and veterans are becoming to our society. So let's start out with taking a big perspective on the big picture of our disaster business. The simple fact is that we're having to do more with less. We have some massively growing risk factors. And this includes the fact that the frequency and magnitude of natural disasters is growing at a distinctive rate. Global climate change is additionally not only disrupting normative patterns for disaster events, but also chipping away at the natural resilience of certain geographic locations, such as my own new home of California, where the increasing drought conditions are becoming a perpetual emergency, essentially, for our part of the world. Population migration and economic investment is also becoming disturbing because it's not reflecting the increasing threats from global climate change and from the developments in natural disaster events. People are still investing and moving to high-risk areas, primarily including coastal regions and high population centers, so large cities along the coast, which do provide jobs and trade, but are also the greatest at risk for, say, sea level rise and general flooding from major weather events such as hurricanes. Last, and especially in the United States, this is becoming notable once again, is there are divides in the geographic income and resilience levels found within jurisdictions, notably within our states. This is essentially creating an environment in which our readiness as a nation is undermined at the micro level, because while we can respond in mass to major disasters, our systems aren't necessarily set up to provide support to small communities that don't necessarily hit the damage amounts that would trigger a larger state or national level response, but are still catastrophic in the perspective of the people who live there due to their economic standing, or just because the town is really that small, the community is that small and essentially just got wiped out. So bringing in some readiness issues to top off to those risk factors, budget cuts and the remaining effects of the economic recession that happened in 2011 still pervade emergency management. I graduated from my university in 2011, so I got to taste it firsthand when the jobs disappeared and budgets crunched and exercises had to go away. These all cut into general readiness, and while we're recovering, FEMA's budget, for example, right now is the highest it's been since the recession. This hasn't necessarily echoed down or been reflected at the local level. A lot of small communities still do not have the funds to do adequate disaster readiness or mitigation activities. Between different states, between different localities, there's a massive variability in the funding policies and practices used in local government. Some places have absolutely no emergency management system. They do not reflect best practices. Some places look like essentially they could reflect the national EOC on any given day. This disparity is distinct in terms of readiness, and because a lot of the places that are affected by natural disasters are also those regions which don't have the funds to reflect the national EOC and their preparedness, you find that they just simply don't have the resilience to take on the stress of a major disaster event. There are also a lot of confused support expectations of state and federal government. Localities, especially small, say, counties where the local population truly believes that the state will come and help them if they are affected by a natural disaster, are sometimes very sorely disappointed when they simply receive a liaison officer who says they're there to help them organize and that the community is essentially on its own. This is, again, usually because the scale of the event hasn't triggered a disaster declaration, and at the same time it still has a major impact on the people who live there. So this leads to rather unhappy people. It can often lead to election issues for politicians who work in that neck of the woods, and also leaves the community with a gap which can bite them very badly at the end of the day unless specific action is taken to close up that mismatch in expectations beforehand. And lastly, and sadly well documented, there's a recurring "this won't happen on my watch" mentality. Frequently this occurs because politicians or elected officials have a short term in office, or numbers of business are able to influence the decision-making process without the input or feedback of people such as urban planners or emergency managers. And essentially changes are made, money's hands, zoning regulations are created without the perspective of emergency management, and even when the perspective of a risk is conveyed to them, they frequently continue with the action believing that they can get in and out before a major event occurs, and this just leaves everyone hanging in the balance. So the result of this combination of risk factors and readiness issues is there is a distinct mismatch, and within many areas of this country there's a service gap between what a local jurisdiction is ready to deal with in the day-to-day and what can be projected to be their needs during a major disaster event. So this disparity is where volunteers come into play. There's always a small contingent of available emergency management and response resources, your fire department, your police department, maybe the local Red Cross, the local church, and they're often integrated into the community as a ready resource. However, when that major disaster occurs, a vacuum is created as this massive new demand for resources come in. And these resources come from a wide variety of sources, and this includes external government agencies, so you have like nearby jurisdictions, you see the invocation of EMAC to bring in outside state resources. You'll see private sector contracts to bring in paid assets. However, still very frequently is not enough to fill the vacuum. So you see regular citizens stand up, you see businesses donating their spaces and their personnel and their resources. You see the religious organizations of the community stand up and call in resources from their affiliated dioceses and the like. And then you see nonprofit, non-governmental organizations also step in to fill the gap. And these are all essentially providing either donated resources or volunteers. Now, as I mentioned earlier, traditionally in emergency management, volunteers have been placed into this single bucket where they're not considered skilled assets, and they're generally needed to be, they generally need a massive amount of management and guidance, and often their presence is seen as a confounding variable in its own right. Some areas have really taken on the new idea that volunteers can be a massive asset, and there's a reason why they've been able to shift their perspective. It's because they've been able to differentiate between the different types of volunteers that exist. And the simple fact is that not all volunteers are created equal. All bring this great energy and this desire to serve. Many of them bring also specific capabilities and skills that may not otherwise have been accessible or notable by the jurisdiction and those who are running the response. If we wanted to go through and break down the volunteers that one may see at a disaster, you can break them down into spontaneous volunteers, laymen, and then professional volunteers. The spontaneous volunteer is unaffiliated, shows up only for that event. They are the wild card in terms of skill, and often this is a great concern to the community because having, for example, 2,000 spontaneous volunteers show up on a day to help at a given location constitutes its own small humanitarian disaster if there's nothing there to help them out. However, not all those spontaneous volunteers are adding to the problem. A lot of them simply need the right direction to apply some very skilled capabilities and skill sets to the job at hand. Great example from my background in search and rescue was a search for a young lady that went missing at a concert. We ended up having to manage over 2,000 volunteers over the course of a single weekend, and we only had about 100 personnel to pull that off. Now, how do we make up for the span of control gap? What we did was we essentially put systems in place to triage all the spontaneous volunteers that came in, and any of them that came in that had previous military leadership experience, were avid outdoorsmen, were community leaders and the like, we collected them, gave them rapid training, just-in-time training, and put them in charge of other volunteers, thus essentially expanding our ability to manage the incident by indoctrinating a bunch of folks who were ready and willing to step up to the plate to help us get things done. So within this bunch, you can see that it's really important to already begin to even look into subdividing down this group into, okay, who can help us manage and who's here to help shovel dirt and get things done in the field as a worker bee. That already is helping differentiate the problem at hand and really make it easier to manage. However, this is still the case. Because they're unaffiliated, they generally don't know about disaster relief as a whole. They do require extensive leadership and support. They'll require resupply. You need just-in-time training to make sure they know safety standards and the like. So they do come with a heavy burden no matter where they come from. Layman volunteers, on the other hand, are affiliated volunteers, so maybe they are members of local church, and they have some exposure to the various community service capabilities that their organization does. These folks, they show up relatively regularly. This is not necessarily what they do in life, but they do it consistently enough that whatever role they fill in the church, whatever role they fill in this maybe the nonprofit that they work for, that they volunteer at, is really well memorized, and they have this great capability of picking that skill set up and turning it around so that it's useful elsewhere with very little redirection. And a wonderful example of this from the same search and rescue operation, in point of fact, was an event planner that we identified who came in and said, hey, I'm with this group. We'd like to help, but what I do is I organize major events. And I looked into making sure that everyone gets fed and gets housed throughout the course of the event. Well, at this particular point, we were at a lack for a skilled logistician. And so this person was pulled aside, put to work, and essentially turning her skill set around and absorbing the specific needs that our search and rescue personnel had. She was able to get the entire community to support logistically the search endeavor. And she did it in an amazing fashion. But this is because she brought a distinct skill set. She was already integrated a bit into the structure, and she required only a moderate level of leadership and support in order to get things done. All we had to do was provide her the guidance necessary to reorient her from her normal task and role into what we needed to get done. Still, requires a fair amount of leadership and support. The lack of familiarity with disaster response and relief leads for a need for some very good coaching, especially at the beginning, to ensure that integration happens properly. Now, the next group is the professional volunteer. Professional volunteers are a different breed entirely. And while they're already affiliated with a volunteer organization of some kind, they're integrated into the emergency and disaster response system. They maintain a high level of industry-specific skill proficiencies and knowledge, and they do this on their own time. They maintain professional certifications on their own dime. They maintain their training on a regular and intensive basis on their own time, doing it for free because it's something that they enjoy and love. These people, when things are successfully prepared for, are already integrated into the emergency management and response system. So, for example, my old search and rescue agency was integrated into the Virginia Department of Emergency Management Search and Rescue Plan. Team Rubicon will very soon be integrated into the plans for Texas emergency management for their management of spontaneous volunteers. So this sort of thing where there's a common understanding of the skill sets available leads professional volunteers to be very closely linked with the professional paid community. These folks, in addition, because they know what they're doing, they have the certifications, they understand the business, are simply fire and forget. You bring them in, you brief them, you put them to work, and they're generally self-sustaining. They're able to handle their own operations and organize themselves, and all they need is that strategic direction and maybe some additional logistical support for sustainment in order to contribute to the mission. And so looking across this group, you can see that the most obvious bunch that will be an asset to the community from the very start will be the professional volunteers. Because these folks can be identified, they're low investment, high return emergency management and response assets. So, with that in mind, what will you see when you look at a professional disaster relief volunteer? Well, generally we talk about knowledge, skills, and attitudes when it comes to defining jobs and roles. So let's look at that in that light. For knowledge, we've got these people understanding how EOC operations work. They can walk in the front door, they know who they need to talk to, they know what their role is in supporting operations at that level. They understand the National Incident Management System and have a fluent capability to discuss incident command structures, documentation, that sort of thing. They have a strong understanding of the individual assistance and public assistance programs at FEMA, and the reason this is important, especially among volunteer incident management personnel, is that they should be able to assist in the documentation of the resources and volunteer efforts put into aiding the disaster relief operation. This becomes very important later on with FEMA reimbursements, which we'll talk about in an example later. Lastly, they'll be very aware of damage assessment methodology. They will know how to conduct rapid assessments, collect work orders, and turn around those work orders into completed events and closing out those customer relationships. That sort of knowledge in doctrine and also fluency in how to get it done is a key indicator, because those are people who essentially do it regularly. In terms of skills, you've got people who have strong incident management capabilities, folks who have already taken all the ICS training available, up to 300, 400, maybe position-specific training, all for the heck of it because they enjoy working in this field. You have folks with certifications in emergency medicine and rescue, often beyond the EMT level. You'll see high levels of field leadership capability, and of course this is not everyone, but certainly there's an enhanced level that comes from people who know what they're doing on the ground and can act as essentially force multipliers for small groups of others. And that's just a behavior pattern that you see in a skill set that is obviously garnered from doing their task. They're executing their skill over and over and over again. And finally, you'll also see a great deal of familiarity with expedient home repair and demolition. Doing things like tarping roofs, mucking out houses, making homes quickly re-inhabitable, or minimizing the overall damage to homes is a large part of what domestic disaster relief volunteers do. They do distribute aid, they do welfare checks, there's all sorts of other things that are out there. But when you see 1,000 volunteers, I'm going to bet you that about 600 to 700 of those volunteers are going to be doing one of those tasks. Lastly, there's a lot of attitude items that really differentiate the professional volunteer from the rest. A lot of these folks, these people, have the tendency to be mission first, and they're consistently thinking about how to move the mission forward. They're not necessarily, their primary thought is not necessarily when do I get home for dinner and what do I get out of this. Professional volunteer is there for almost the exact same reason as a professional emergency manager or an emergency responder. They're there to serve the people who have been hurt. And you will see that demonstrated in the little details that they do in providing their services, and also the way in which they go about making leadership decisions. Very safety conscious. Everybody wants to come home okay, but they're finely tuned to the idea that it's usually drilled into them from the beginning of their training. They're teamwork and collaboration oriented. They're looking to integrate with the professionals and all the other volunteers that are out there to achieve the end mission goal. And they're also customer service focused. They want to make sure that both the community and the local government and the governmental agencies involved in the response have a good feeling about the overall relief effort and the outcomes that are created. So you see from this type of person, is a highly professional, capable person that's able to enhance operations with a higher quality of service, and is virtually, aside from being paid, indistinguishable from someone who is paid as a careerist to do very similar jobs. So a case study for you, a little perspective. Last year, major complex fire burned through large areas of the state of Washington. Over 300,000 acres were burned, and those acres included a very large percentage of the city of Pateros, Washington. And this small town had over 150 homes destroyed and additional businesses ruined. Unlike many disasters that one sees in the United States, there was a huge displacement of residents for fire evacuations, and many were turned homeless by the destruction of their homes or the residual impact of the fire, which was still raging at the time that the city began to do its relief and recovery effort. Now, the unfortunate circumstance that surrounded them was that this complex fire had essentially sucked up all the resources the state had available to run an emergency response effort. FEMA had even dedicated 2 Type 1 teams to helping control this fire. And for those of you who are aware of the FEMA IMT structure, that's very, very significant. So essentially there was nothing there to help this crippled community get back on its feet. So the local government is overwhelmed. There are not enough resources to go around. Critical infrastructure is down. Most of the responders are actually also victims. And so in looking out across the disaster field, they decided to call upon Team Rubicon to provide them support and to basically organize their relief effort as subject matter experts and leaders. And making history, they signed over a delegation of authority for Team Rubicon, an external NGO, to guide their governmental agencies in the act of disaster relief and recovery. The month-long operation that started on July 22nd and continued through the next month was a massive success that essentially blew everyone's minds, including the head of the IMT that was running the fire event, who came down to visit on several occasions to see what was going on. In the end, Team Rubicon's professional volunteers, all volunteers, were able to coordinate 6 government agencies, 5 separate NGOs, deploy 83 volunteers, and manage over 793 spontaneous volunteers, a massive number of personnel. The services that were provided by all of the above constituted to over 250,000 in documented services that the city of Pateros was able to claim from FEMA. Now this is critical because essentially this is free money for a jurisdiction. When volunteer hours, work, and dedicated resources are appropriately documented, this locality and the state can claim for reimbursement from the federal government. And while it's not necessarily at a 1-to-1 parity ratio, it is a distinct amount of money, as you can see here. And all of this was able to go back and basically multiply upon the relief efforts that Team Rubicon and its partners were able to achieve in their time in Pateros, Washington. So with that in mind, you have a little perspective on the power of professional volunteers, that they can stand directly beside the career emergency management professional and often include professional emergency managers who want to continue applying their skill across the nation and get additional opportunities to, say, work in the field or get into incident management or other capabilities that they've had an interest in and don't find available to them in their local jurisdiction. So from that, let's transition to talking a little bit about veterans. It's been long acknowledged that veterans have a value of some kind. We're very fortunate to have learned the lessons of Vietnam and to appreciate the services that our military members give to our nation while in uniform. And when they get out, their experience has been given this kind of nebulous quality. No one's really defined it as some leadership ability, some specific skills, that sort of thing. But it's not definitively pared down, and it's not fully acknowledged about society of what the veteran brings to the world, the civilian world, when they get out. The first thing that they bring with them is an interest to serve. Over 92% of veterans still want to serve their country after they exit the military, and they truly and deeply believe in the oath they took when they joined the military. I personally am from a Navy family, and my father still to this day believes ardently in the oath he took to serve the United States and protect the Constitution. This is a really huge dedication. It means a great deal to all of these individuals. And so they're looking for these opportunities, whether they often know it or not, in order to regain that ability to serve their country. Now, your average veteran brings with them also a very distinct set of baseline skills and traits. The ability to make decisions in crises, when things are going wrong, when the bullets are flying by, being able to make reliable and good decisions. A lot of them, if they weren't able to do that, wouldn't have come back to life. The ability to tolerate high levels of stress, too. Massive capability. It's a well-documented notion that veterans just simply have a higher stress tolerance than average civilians, just because, especially with those who have deployed overseas in the recent conflicts, they've simply been exposed enough to develop that mental resilience. So when a disaster, say, occurs, it doesn't ruffle them as much. It seems more familiar than it does for the rest of us. Chaos management is a normal activity for many of them. It's something that they distinctly have to do in order to get their job done in the military, as all pieces move and not all variables are known. They're oriented to working in teams. They understand chain of command, its value, and how to create and live within it. They have a mission-first mindset which is drilled into them from the first day at boot camp. And in order to get anything done, they've had to improvise. And these are all things that are commonly seen and critical on the disaster ground. Looking at the picture on your right, if that was your neighborhood, if there was one guy in that neighborhood who you could look to help you get things done and help serve the people who have been impacted, a person with those baseline skills and traits is certainly the person I would choose to have standing by my side, because they would help me get things done, and they'd be a steady reference and reliable person that I could work with. So yes, Jeffrey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Had a small tech issue.
That's
all right. Moving on. So, veterans are this hidden asset that haven't been fully been called upon by communities. We believe in Team Rubicon that veterans not only provide a massive asset in disaster relief, but they also get something from serving in that environment. Many of them, as previously stated, are looking for that opportunity, and that opportunity proves to be very cathartic. It gives them back the sense of purpose, the sense of community, and sense of self-worth they had when they wore the uniform and served the flag of their country. So, at the end of the day, it's a beautiful meshing in which you have someone who starts out with that wonderful baseline of skills that are of value to emergency managers and responders, come in and essentially find a home in the chaos that would otherwise disrupt the rest of the community. Now, I'm going to show you guys a little video really quickly, which will both introduce Team Rubicon a little more and delve into this idea of what veterans get out of the ability to serve in disaster response and what they bring to the disaster response field.
Immediately after a devastating earthquake in January of 2010, a handful of young Americans traveled to Haiti to see how they could help. Among them were two former Marines, Jake Wood and William McNulty. Utilizing skills they developed in the military, Wood and McNulty provided life-saving assistance to thousands of people whose world had literally collapsed around them. As a result of their relief work in Haiti, the two former Marines created Team Rubicon, an organization of American military veterans who respond in a similar fashion whenever a natural disaster hits, whether it's to a neighborhood-leveling tornado in Joplin, Missouri, or the community-destroying fury of Hurricane Sandy. Tens of thousands of Americans have rebuilt their lives with the help of Team Rubicon.
There are three things that you lose when you take off the military uniform. That's purpose, community, and identity. we can take that veteran, we can make them the
So that was a video that was played during the celebration and salute to service that occurred, and a salute to valor, I apologize, earlier this year. And the basic idea that goes behind it is we have over 20 million veterans in the United States spanning service between the Korean War and now. Approximately 5 million of those are coming back from service in one of the Gulf Wars that occurred over the last 20 years. These servicemen and women are a huge asset to our communities and are pretty much, for the most part, ready and able to serve the communities that they live in one way or another. They are an underlying capability that has not been fully grasped upon. Team Rubicon is making the effort to bring them into the disaster field, and it's something that all of you as emergency managers and responders can capitalize upon in your work within your communities. So how does Team Rubicon take this veteran and turn them into a professional volunteer? Essentially, we have them sign up, they go through a professional background check, and enter a training pipeline where they conduct baseline online training, which provides them the same training that you would find in a professional first responder. Familiarity training with incident command systems, with NIMS and the National Response Framework, as well as baseline skill training through Module 1, which gives them the idea of the culture of Team Rubicon, the expectations, basic field skills, and basic safety practices. Once they've completed that basic training, they're able to mobilize for service projects or response operations across the nation for the skill set that they are qualified to fulfill. As they move along in their time as a volunteer, they gain access to T3 training, tools, tactics, and techniques, where they can get to learn things like chainsaw operations, or how to muck out houses, how to conduct disaster assessments and do damage assessment activities using high-tech technology, or even run heavy equipment such as bulldozers. They also gain access to advanced leadership and incident management training. Team Rubicon provides through the Texas Extension Service ICS 300 and 400 to its members and leaders on a regular basis. In addition, it has partnerships which provide access. In addition, it provides access to position-specific training, such as Planning Section Incident Commander training provided through FEMA. In addition, Team Rubicon is a regular participant in the National Exercise Program, the NEP, and conducts functional exercises throughout its regions to essentially maintain readiness and continuously train in the techniques and processes it uses to conduct disaster relief. In this way, it's always developing its professional volunteers. It's consistently training, consistently refining its processes so that whether it be the baseline veteran who comes in through the front door or an experienced emergency manager who wants to taste a little bit more of field action, they'll get the opportunity to get the skills and capabilities necessary to stand beside anyone who could be paid to conduct those activities in the field. Now, that's a tactical perspective. I'm going to give you a little bit bigger one. Our volunteers lead our organization. Professional volunteers are not just ground pounders. Team Rubicon is organized according to the FEMA regions, and we have 10 regions overall. These regions are completely led and run by a team of 7 to 10 professional volunteers and are additionally supported within many states by a cadre of 3 to 4 state leaders, all of whom put in countless hours executing often complex processes, creating professionalized deliverables, all in their own volunteer time. In the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you can see one of the algorithms we use for decision-making and product development. Not simple. Our operational turnaround time is 48 hours. That means people are sitting at the switch constantly to be ready to go to respond to a disaster because it's what they love, because they love to serve. So as you can see, professional volunteers and veterans can stand up and serve in just about any capacity, whether it be shoveling mud out of a house or standing next to an emergency manager in an emergency operations center. So now I'm going to take a second and show you a little bit about the Team Rubicon's future in engagement and professional programming. What we're looking to do is expand the number of people that can participate in a disaster response. And this is because the simple fact is that everyone's limited by some very distinct issues in the volunteer world. And these issues are basically family obligations, career obligations, or lack of funds or physical access. One of these four will disqualify any person from being able to respond, and that's just simply a fact of life. But that doesn't mean that they can't, that there isn't a way for them to participate. It doesn't mean that they're not interested. And often, just having the opportunity dangling in front of one's nose is a very stressful and tantalizing experience in its own right, which causes stress. So Team Rubicon is creating, in the coming months, a program called Watch Center to engage these volunteers across the country in providing highly professionalized services for situational awareness and mission support nationwide to any disaster response that may occur. Built off of a remote cloud-based platform, Phase 1 of its development is currently providing situational awareness to Team Rubicon leaders and partners nationwide. Regular deliverables such as daily threat briefing, maintenance of an awareness website, and provision of early warning messaging as threats develop essentially allow us to maintain a perpetual state of awareness and readiness, and also takes pressure off of other volunteer leaders who need to decide between working on development activities, watching evolving to disaster events, or focusing on their family and job for the day. This allows us, with additional information regarding our personnel availability, to create a common operating picture, seeing what threats exist and our capability to respond to them at any given time. As the program develops, what we're looking to do is expand volunteer engagement to a much larger community. As we build that out, this is going to focus heavily on people such as disabled veterans who may never be able to respond to the disaster ground and get the benefits of service in that environment that their less debilitated comrades are able to achieve. Also, for essentially opening up access to participate, people who have extremely significant skill sets in things like intelligence analysis or leadership, but otherwise have busy careers that would never let them leave the office. As we expand, we're going to be providing extensive mission support, and this ability is already in its infant stages. Increased mission support means the provision of mapping capabilities and analysis capabilities through our Palantir and GIS systems, providing remote incident management support, such as the processing of incident action plans and the creation of team assignments, for example, or the processing of work orders off-site through cloud computing. They provide data collection and analytics for anything that could be asked for, whether it be mapping the response itself to see what leaders of what organizations are active, or if it's determining what the appropriate legal precedent is for a certain activity within a jurisdiction. They are going to provide 24/7 support point of contact to leaders in the field and regional managers nationwide, basically providing a sense of security to those in the field, that they always have someone to reach out to, and also providing a constant node for the management of support requests. They'll provide a centralized communication hub so that any issues that come from communicating between the EOC functions at the regional or national level to the incident can be overcome and managed. And they'll also provide enhanced mission planning services to often overwhelmed regional managers who are sometimes working in very, very small 1 to 3 person teams within a region. A great example of that is going on right as we speak. Illinois was struck by a massive storm system last night, leading to multiple tornadoes and major hail, which has led to major impact on communities throughout the northern and central sections of the state. The regional manager, instantly noting the scale of the incident, sent a message requesting remote support for their planning efforts. That was approved late last night. The team now has an additional 15 personnel to their two providing skilled imagery, information and information analysis to support their planning efforts, and the deployment of a reconnaissance element to find where Team Rubicon can best support ongoing response and relief efforts. Lastly, we're going to provide an enhanced common operating picture as Team Rubicon develops as an organization. We earlier spoke about being able to see personnel availability, so we're going to add to that by maintaining warehouse stores, cache statuses, seeing the availability and deployment status of equipment throughout the nation, understanding repair schedules and integrating those so that we can see when our vehicles and trailers are ready or being worked on and how far they are away from the incident. Essentially adding to that idea of understanding what the threat is, what is occurring, and what's available to get the job done. What program success looks like for Watch Center is essentially TR Nation, our large community of now 25,000 members, being empowered and organized through this program, supporting regional leadership in their functions, while being directed and advised by our headquarters and field operations element to provide 24/7, 365 situational awareness, remote mission support, and facilitation of field operations across the nation and throughout the world, all while gaining real-world job skills and experience. And this experience and skills goes to both the highly professionalized personnel who run careers that keep them away from our regular relief operations, regular volunteers who are geographically isolated from the incident, and those who are, say, physically disabled and would never be able to respond at all. So, some conclusions and final thoughts for all of you to chew on. I hope through the course of this talk that you've been able to see that volunteers are an integral part of emergency management and disaster relief in the modern age, both before and after the response begins. Not all volunteers are created equal. There's a big difference between non-skilled emergent volunteers and the proficient professional disaster response volunteer. Before response operations, it is very valuable to put effort into identifying those organizations and people that provide capable layman and professional volunteer resources within your communities or within your professional fields. Consider integrating ways of identifying skilled spontaneous volunteers into your response methodologies and your volunteer management capabilities. Consider finding ways of integrating veterans and active service members into your disaster response plans, training events, and other preparedness activities. Both sides will gain from this opportunity to serve. Remember that the only limits, as I hope has been shown through Watch Center and our current, Team Rubicon's current activities, show that the only limitation to what professional volunteers can achieve in support of any activity is only based on imagination, leadership, and the ability to innovate. So with that said, that's the end of my talk today. I'll take your questions now. Please type them in, and I'll be more than happy to read out the question and provide an answer.
All right, thank you, Evan. While people maybe postulate some questions here and think about some things, I had two separate questions for you. One, if people were thinking about getting involved in Team Rubicon, do you have to be a veteran? And if not, how could you get involved? And as kind of a second part to that question, what's your current makeup of volunteers, veterans versus just civilians?
Signing up for Team Rubicon is very easy. You simply go to our website, teamrubiconusa.org, and we have a very well-organized website which will direct you to something called Roll Call. Roll Call will allow you to sign up, and sign up is open to veterans, civilians alike. We have a way of designating through the process whether you're a veteran, a professional first responder, emergency manager, or just a kick-ass civilian who wants to go help get things done in the course of the sign-up process. So that's just for our metrics. Everyone's welcome if you bring the right mind and the right heart to the activity. Our current composition and breakdown between veterans and civilians is 80-20, so 80% veterans and 20% civilian personnel. I myself am a civilian and have never done military service.
Okay, great. I also had a question sent to me asking, obviously this is a growing organization and it's continuing to expand. And it's a volunteer organization. How do you guys fund the actual overhead of the organization to keep things going and keep it growing?
Wonderful question. I actually just saw the updated breakdown earlier last night. Essentially, if I remember this correctly, we're actually, you know what, I'm going to look it up. This is the beauty of technology these days. I can pull up graphs and breakdowns right before your eyes. So, now let me see. All right, the current breakdown is 49% nonprofit foundations and trusts, 30% private individuals, grassroots fundraising, and 21% major businesses and corporations. These include, say, like the Home Depot, which is a major partner of ours in providing both financial and physical assistance. A wonderful relationship with them. They've been great partners. They actually provide us a dedicated space in any of their parking lots when we need to deploy a field element for running operations. So really neat stuff.
That's awesome. So very little any governmental support for you guys. It's all basically private forms of funding.
Exactly. Right now, that governmental support number is 0.
Great. Anyone else have any questions for Evan? We have another minute or two before we close out this room. All right, I don't see any fingers typing or anyone raising their hand trying to get in here. Evan, we greatly appreciate your time with us. Thank you for sticking around with us. You were our last speaker here at the virtual seminar series for spring 2015. Thanks for joining us, everyone that's been in all throughout the year here. The seminars will return again in the fall of 2015. Again, Evan Koepke from Team Rubicon. Thanks for speaking with us, and have a great weekend.
My pleasure. Take care.